僕は導く。人の夢、人の望み。届けよう。すべて遠き星の海へ。いつか僕らはたどり着く。ペイル、ブルー、ドット。
Welcome back, nerds. Fino here to cover the last of the Fate Requiem trio. It's the Shota from outside the solar system, Boku no Space Probe. It's Voyager. He's coming back to Earth, like in that one Star Trek movie no one liked. Let's see if he fares any better. Voyager is a 5-star foreigner focused on a combination of farming tools and party utility. First up, we've got Voyager of the Stars. It's a 50% battery with 3 turns of personal debuff immunity and a small star dump. A battery that large is extremely powerful on a quick farmer, and it enables Voyager to use a variety of CEs that wouldn't be efficient for much of his competition, most notably Traces of Christmas's Past and Holy Night's Supper. In short, you're not married to Kaleidoscope. And multi-turn debuff immunity is handy for boss battles. It's not even restricted by ticks. That said, my testing gave me some questionable results with looping pure Berserker waves at NP1 with a 50% CE, so you might want to keep the Super Scope around just in case you plan to use a low-end Voyager. Either that or use a flat charge Mystic Code like how they have Pathfinder, which comes with this year's summer camping event. Next is Swing By. It's a quick buff with 1 turn of evasion and 3 turns of a single target quick resistance down. Here the farming and anti-boss parts of Voyager conflict a bit because you have to use this on turn 1 if you're gonna farm with him. The turn when the debuff matters the least. This leaves a bog standard 20% quick buff, which pales in comparison to what 4-star servants like Valkyrie and Parvati get. They have higher magnitude quick buffs and more reliable secondary effects like NP gain or NP damage. But speaking of NP damage buffs, Voyager does have access to it, which brings us to his noble phantasm, Pale Blue Dot. It's an AoE quick attack that does extra damage to heaven attribute enemies. Also comes with 20% party charge and another 10% for living humans. These include MASH, pseudo-servants like the various Fate Stay Night humans, and a mishmash of other crossovers including Shiki Ryogi, but apparently not Void Shiki? You know what? Don't explain it to me. The less I have to think about KNK8, the better. On top of all this, Voyager gets preemptive NP damage tied to overcharge, but it's only a single turn, so he can't snowball like Space Ishtar. Tragic stuff. In using Voyager, you'll find that getting back up into Scotty range is actually quite trivial between his personal battery and Da Vinci-style bonus charge. Since Berserker enemies give the least refund of all enemy types, that's certainly a point in his favor. But there's more to farming than NPing 3 times in a row. You actually have to kill your targets. And here's where it starts to go awry. Voyager's attack stat is on the low end of 5-star servants, around the point where you start seeing 4-star berserkers. If you aren't fighting heaven attribute enemies, it gets even rougher, because then all you have left are your quick and NP damage buffs, neither of which are particularly strong. Maybe you can stretch it with something like Golden Sumo since attack buffs are multiplicative with those other 2 types, but generally you're going to be sweating over your damage thresholds a fair bit. You could try to compensate by getting more NP levels, but Voyager is a limited 5-star servant. From a crossover no less. Outside of GSSRs, I think he's in a total of 2 banners, so odds are if you want to go the distance, you'll be paying up front. And for what? The privilege of farming berserkers? Because it's not like you're going to be 3-turn looping hordes of pretenders or other foreigners on a regular basis. Even within the umbrella of quick servants, you have alternatives like Dantes, Atalanta, Parvati, and Valkyrie. They may not have Voyager's sheer charge generation, but with some skill ordering finesse, you can get them to fill his role. After all, Berserkers are weak against most classes, and if you're really desperate, Plugsuit Shenanigans and Arash are always on the table. But what about boss fights? To complete our picture of Voyager's kit, let's look at his final skill, Protection of World's End, Space. It gives party crit damage and crit chance resistance with targeted star absorption. With a 3-digit magnitude, it's not good enough to pair with Berserkers or Avengers, but for other classes, it should do the trick. So here's how I imagine his use case. Either the boss has a mandatory trash wave or side mobs to eliminate. Voyager can charge up and hit them with Pale Blue Dot. This generates charge and stars, the latter of which you direct onto your main attacker with Protection of World's End. Then they do the heavy lifting while riding off Voyager's crit buff. I'll note that future foreigner Van Gogh has a lot of on-paper synergy with this strat, so you may want to look into her if you're committed to Voyager. Mixed attacker strats tend to be pretty jank compared to double support options, but honestly the underlying logic with a Voyager combo seems alright. You just have to make sure you can do enough damage for the trash mobs. If you're interested in some of the more unconventional ways of using Voyager, there's an App Media article that shows some funny compositions. I wouldn't necessarily advocate using some of these in practice, but you've got some hypothetical knee slappers like Voyager Artoria Mordred, and Voyager Da Vinci Rider and whoever the fuck. And charge on NP does have its uses. On a final note, one of Voyager's passives includes a small amount of buff removal resistance. It's too inconsistent to plan around, but you'll occasionally lucksack through one of those nasty purge NP combos, and if you're wondering why, this is the reason. Overall, Voyager is a mixed bag. The NP generation, 50% battery, and Foreigner class combo might be enticing, but you should keep in mind that Voyager's buy-in is high. And since we have the benefit of hindsight, we know that you'd be buying high on the quick meta, only for Castoria to come along in a few months and flip the table. But that isn't to say that quick teams are going the way of the dinosaur. A, that's Buster, and B, even though they won't be dominant for the foreseeable future, they'll still be around as an alternative. In fact, there's some really effective servants coming down the road, like Limbo, Karen, and Saber Okita Alter, which is another reason why I have trouble recommending Voyager. Even if you're intent on living life in the quick lane, those are way more effective uses of your money. Voyager has a huge trade-off between looping and killing shit, and I'd argue his low attack and weak steroids are way too high of a price to pay for his looping consistency. You know, that and the literal price of getting him to NP5. He's not bad, but he's also not good enough value for me to recommend. Thanks for watching. Want to see me roll for the servant I just slagged off? You can. Twitch.tv/Finotaisen. I stream every weekend at 3 p.m. Pacific, Friday through Sunday. See you there, and let's get some NP1 potatoes.